Now you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown, the podcast that looks at the stats, XG, and performance of Celtic FC. It's been a wild few weeks in Scottish football. Rangers are now 19-point clear of Celtic in the table, having won the derby last weekend, and yet the team photographed at the side of a pool, having a few beers and enjoying themselves, were not the ones that were wearing blue and red. We're unfolding the derby and looking at what might be next for the club over the next 40 minutes or so. And to do that, I'm joined by Juco James and Alan Morrison. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year, Enda.
Happy New Year, guys.
So let's get straight into it then. Rangers 1, Celtic 0. Callum McGregor with an OG near Beaton sent off on the 62nd minute. The general stats for this game: Celtic 49% possession, shots 13 in total, 3 on target. Rangers 10 shots, 0 on target, which is actually quite funny since they won the game. So where are we actually starting here? Alan, I'll let you go first. I suppose the general feeling coming out of this game was that the first half was pretty good, pretty decent, good performance, and then after the red card for near Beaton, it all kind of fell apart.
Yeah, I think I would qualify that. I think the first 20 minutes were very good, maybe 16 minutes actually. I think the diamond, which I think we're going to go on to talk about in more detail, allowed Celtic to control possession of the game. The midfield were very aggressive in their pressing. One of the benefits of a diamond formation is that it's easier to keep people physically connected to each other, so pressing becomes a lot simpler from a sort of movement communication perspective, and that worked very well. Chances did come in that opening 20 minutes. They weren't particularly great chances. In fact, the overall match XG was probably a lot closer than you would think. Maybe I think it was 1.4 to 1.1 or something like that. I think from my model, so pretty close. After the 16-20 minute mark, after they had a couple of chances in the box, Morelos scuffed a shot wide, rebo had a shot. It was actually, the game started to settle down into being pretty much a fairly even game, frankly. And after half time, it was a 50-50 coin toss up to the sending off, in all honesty. And then I think what we saw then was the goal, both the goal, well, the sending off, the goal, and then what happened in the aftermath would really be where I would have massive concerns, because there we saw issues that we've seen over and over again, this season. The fragility of the confidence just evaporated as soon as there was any, as soon as bad stuff started to happen. The fullbacks, I think we need to talk about them in the context of the diamond. But again, if you look at the sending off, the positioning is just all over the place in terms of the goal, in terms of the shape of the defence, as the ball's played over Laxalt's head to where Bitton was. Ayer's nowhere near him. The two centre backs are not connected. The fullbacks are not in position. And actually, if you look at how that sending off was arrived at, Celtic actually had a free kick in central midfield. They gave the ball to Laxalt. Laxalt once again gave it away. Incredible that he would give the ball away. And the ball went back to McGregor. And as had happened since the first minute, McGregor took an absolute age to do anything with the ball. They were time wasting, actually, from the first minute. They were content to play for a draw. And therefore, what is the excuse that the whole defence is out of shape when several, tens of seconds later, the ball was played down the right wing and Beaton's left exposed? Beaton then panics. He makes the challenge look a lot worse than it was by actually physically rugby tackling the guy. In my view, this is where I think the concept of expected goals would be a really useful one to introduce to referees. Because if you want to talk about, probability of scoring from that position where Morelos was running in on goal, yes, he would have had a clear run, but actually from where he would have taken the shot, which is, wide right in the box, he'd have had no more than a 10-15% chance of scoring anyway. And you've got to think, do you send somebody off? Is that a high enough probability of scoring to send somebody off? And I'm not saying that because it was Celtic. I think that's a general point, actually. If he was central, I think you would be a lot more concerned about that particular challenge. But the fact remains that it was a systemic failure of the defence to be organised and to get into a shape, which we've seen so many times. And Bitton, who I think had been the best player on the park until that point, completely lost his head and just panicked. He absolutely panicked, which he tends to do once he realised he'd got the wrong side of Morelos, which is his concentration, which we've seen time and time again in big games, failed him. After that, like you say, it was a bit of a shapeless mess, and I think that really comes down to lack of game management again. After Celtic's initial, as you said, we started pretty well, but the game was tapering away before the sending off. It was going nowhere in a game that we had to win, and the changes never came. Gerrard made a change at half-time. I don't think Hadji was particularly added a lot, but he at least stopped the issue that they had where Morelos and Roof were essentially duplicating their respective roles. Hadji at least provided more of a sort of 10 threat, dropping into spaces, picking the ball up. At least he did something. Again, the changes came too late, and when they did come, they were completely incoherent in terms of what we were trying to do. And you only need to look back to the sending off of Simunovic under Rodgers and the introduction of Edouard and how Rodgers managed that game to win it, to see a rather stark contrast with how the aftermath of the sending off was managed. But overall, they can't believe they've won it, because I honestly don't think they set out to win the game. They set out not to lose. Barisic and Tavernier barely crossed the halfway line. There was very few overlapping runs. Defensively, they basically their plan was to get the ball to their three forwards as quickly as possible, and then to basically play from there. And if they get something, that's all well and good. They won't believe how easy that was for them.
Yeah, and I think going into the game, as soon as I saw the starting lineup and I saw Beaton playing at centre half, I immediately was a little bit weary of what could potentially unfold. Celtic starting lineup in the game: Barkas and goal, Frimpong, Ayer, Beaton, Laxalt, the diamond of Sorrow, Turnbull, Christie, McGregor, and Griffiths and Edouard up front. I suppose my general idea of the game, of how it went, the fullbacks again, the output of them once they get into the final third is unbelievably frustrating. Sorrow, I think, got booked a little bit too early. I think that might have played into his second half performance and how much he got involved in the game. And then in general, just the shot taking, the idea that the Christie or McGregor might score a whirly from 30 yards seemed to be the only idea of where Celtic were actually going to get a goal. James, your general thoughts on how the game went before we get into the actual nitty gritty?
Yeah, I have a little different take than Alan. Probably a lot different take, actually. So, which is good. This makes the show. So I knew as much about the 4-4-2 diamond prior to about 5 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, whenever that was, as I did, rocket science, which is to say nothing. As far as thinking about strategically, looking at it competitively relative to other systems. And I started doing what I usually do, which is, listen to other people talk about it, and I try to figure out what the consensus is, and then I go and run and do my little data thing and test things and try to learn. And I was shocked as to the level of consensus that this was a bad idea, which always perks up my contrarian streak. And then I went and I started testing it. I was like, okay, well, everyone says this is a dumb idea, playing a diamond against a team that relies on their fullbacks because they're going to have open flanks. So I went and I tested it, and then I did a thread last week basically sharing what I'd looked at, which is that very few teams do play it, that they seem to follow the consensus, but that the ones that have played it have actually had pretty good success. So I was really optimistic going into the game because of, number one, if the selection was good, right? So again, I think generally speaking, you could quibble about this or that or the other thing, but generally speaking, I think the selection was pretty good relative to the system. So I was really optimistic, and I thought I would probably tilt a little because of that foundation. The only reason I went into that is because I think foundationally, Rangers probably underestimated their problems that they were going to have from the diamond. I mean, I think we probably imposed more on them than them settling. And while the outright chance creation, like the end product of where the shots came from, was not great. Again, I documented this after the game. We had a lot of ball possession in dangerous areas in space with other players also in space. So, I've gone through and done kind of a hypothetical. If we have a couple of smart passes, just two really, our XG could have been well over 2, where we had players that were in positions of very high danger that made terrible decisions and could have played in other players to have basically a free run direct one-on-one with McGregor. So I think that, and Alan, I agree with Alan. I mean, most of that was in the first 22 minutes. It did kind of go to an equilibrium where I think we still, for the most part, dominated the level of play in midfield. We were counter-pressing effectively, and, the shuttlers and Christie and McGregor were doing an excellent job. So I would just probably say that I think we were more dominant than Alan's characterization, with ineptitude at the end, meaning that I think it easily could have been kind of a 2-3-0 kind of first half if we had had some better decisions made, and some positive variance. I mean, the one McGregor save was, a good save. I mean, that was on Griffith's shot. That was a good save. But the other ones were, kind of standard. The other two were saves he should have made.
Yeah.
And he dumped them right back out in front of the goal. And, between those really 3 opportunities and then the other close to 6 that I documented that we could have easily had better decisions been made, and a few of them being very high quality, likely, all the rest. I mean, I agree 100% with Alan's characterizations and what he said post red card. And the only other thing I'll add real quick, Alan, is that I think we blew the game plan on a substitutions basis before the red card. I mean, what the hell was Griffith still doing on the pitch? Under what scenario does anyone think that he's going to have a full tank after the first half in a system that's relying on active pressing, right? So to me, the problem with that began with Griffiths not getting over. And in the first 20 minutes, he was able to do that. And actually, they were flipping around too. It probably would have been Edouard in the first half, covering Tavernier there. But so, why there wasn't a game plan to get somebody on, or even my preference would have been, and I talked to some people, I thought the game plan going in should have been, because having studied up on the diamond, how we were probably going to press, we needed the front 3. And when I say front 3, I mean Turnbull was pushing up to basically press in the middle. We needed those people to be fit and fresh and have legs, and that is not Griffiths. So why there was not a plan to get him hooked after the first half or early in the second half? Again, he actually had a lot more of the possession, and he had a lot more of the chances than Edouard, Edouard still finished the game with the highest expected scoring contribution of any player. He created 3 chances and had 3 shots, but Griffiths had the best chance, which was pure luck when Rebo tackled somebody and the ball came to him in the box. That was actually the best chance in the whole game. Griffiths had a shot central that he put wide. And that was the best. And it wasn't really a great chance because he was off balance and he was under pressure, but that was actually the best chance that we created. I'll take your point on the openings. You're absolutely spot on in terms of the decision making. To circle back to what you said, and to give you some numbers around the fullbacks. I mean, Laxalt, he gave away the ball 18 times in open play, 18 times from 37 attempted passes, 18 times. But between himself and Frimpong, there were 0 and 8 on crosses. Both had a 0 expected assists. And between them, they lost the ball 13 times in the final third without creating a single chance.
Yeah.
That's one of the 2. So the 2 most egregious opportunities that we blew, one was Frimpong. He had a wide open cross to Griffiths at the back post. I mean, and I don't even, and again, the pitch was terrible. Seems to be something in common between Ibrox and Parkhead right now. Both their pitches look like they're cow pastures. So who knows? I mean, he may have had trouble with something in that regard, but I mean, he flubbed it right to McGregor. That would have been, probably a 0.6 or higher XG opportunity if he puts that to Griffiths. I mean, he's wide open. And there's no one within, 7 to 8 yards of him. I mean, if the cross is put where it should have been put, it's a goal, most likely. And then the second one is Griffiths not playing through Edouard. and taking the
So
shot.
the third minute, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Tavernier collapsed towards Griffiths, and Edouard is just standing there. And to Alan's point, it was Edouard that played the ball wide to Frimpong when he flubbed that cross. So yeah, that doesn't show up on XA.
Celtic never got Edouard in the game. I know he still ended up with the highest expected scoring contribution. Yeah, he completed 6 passes in the whole game.
Yeah,
just couldn't get him in the game.
Yeah, I didn't understand. I thought, again, when I was doing my prep work for my review, looking at how we might play, I thought there was a lot of opportunity to get up Edouard wide left. And I kind of put out this argument. I mean, I don't know why we keep overlapping Laxalt, because we know what's coming, as Alan just documented, and why we didn't move Edouard out there to create even more pressure on Tavernier. I mean, how many times have we seen Edouard come from wide left and go one-on-one on Goldson? I mean, that's how the first shot happened, basically. I mean, it wasn't quite wide, but I mean, he was coming off the left, and that's clearly been his tendency and where his strengths lie. I mean, he scored other goals against them doing that, including in the 2-0 at Ibrox. So when Johnson played him through. So, I don't know. So you can always Monday morning quarterback, as we say in the U.S., and criticize forensically decisions and rewrite history, that kind of thing. But yeah, the fullback play was predictably terrible in the final third. We've certainly talked about that enough.
So let's talk about the fall off between having 11 men on the pitch and having 10 men on the pitch. We've touched on the Beaton tackle already. I think the referee's decision is more based on the fact that he absolutely did not try and get the ball. So there is that comes into the new rule, and the fact that maybe Ayer wasn't in a position where he was the last man back. It's not the rule, but generally that's the old school way of thinking. If he's the last man back and he makes no attempt for the ball, it's usually a red card.
I think it was central end. I would agree. When I listen to referees, say from England, for example, speak, and they talk about refereeing a game like that, a big game, big audience, importance to the title race. You really don't want to send. The attitude would be you don't want to send somebody off. Don't give me an excuse to send a player off. Madden didn't give himself any thinking time. He didn't consult. He couldn't get the red card out quick enough.
Well, that's what I was actually going to say. I was rewatching the highlights before we came on here, and the red card was out immediately. There was no space for maybe he's not close enough to goal for this to be a straight red card. But ultimately, you can't change it. It was a red card, and it was given. So, Alan, what are the numbers saying before and after the red card? Then, what noticeable difference was there?
I think it just is sort of. Well, eventually we took off all 4 midfielders that were really what makes that diamond such an effective. And I will disagree with James on the efficacy of the diamond, and we can come to that maybe later. But that's predicated on those 4 individuals and their collective and individual complementary strengths, and that was completely that all those players were taken off. Duffy came on and was. I mean, I pretty much lost it. I think with Duffy now, he was abysmal. It's just, and I feel for him because his confidence is clearly absolutely shot. He actually probably could have been sent off, and I would say that was more of a red card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than the one that Beaton's, to be honest. And is the way that he kind of couldn't get rid of the ball quick enough on the edge of the box, and that gave a shot away, which was quite a good chance actually late on. Just awful. El Yunusi came on and was abysmal, gave the ball away continually, completed 1 pass. He actually did okay in terms of pressing and challenging, which he's not bad at. I just couldn't see what we were trying to achieve. I honestly don't know what the thinking was around. I understand the Duffy substitution, obviously, and I understand taking Griffiths off. But what happened after that, I honestly couldn't tell you what we were actually trying to achieve. So
I don't think there was one.
Yeah.
I think that's been the point the whole season, and to a large degree in Lennon's tenure is if he doesn't get the original setup right, the in-game management is just not good usually, and if it's in a high pressure environment, I mean,
And it's too late. It's always too late.
Well, not only too late,
he waits too
incoherent.
long.
I go back to my word of the season: incoherent.
I would have had more respect if he'd stuck Duffy as centre forward and started playing long. At least that was a plan. At least that was an idea.
Right.
Something.
Yeah, or
to
right.
Work with, right?
Agreed with you. Like I could even theoretically say, well, if you put Mikey Johnson as the outside and you have Frimpong on the outside of the middle four, I can theoretically. I mean, I don't like that, but I can theoretically see what they might be trying to do there, right? Or if you're going 4-3-2, put a Jetty in to play hold up and play in Edouard on the counter. That would make sense. There's something going on there. But to end up with Scott Brown and Rogic as your two central midfielders, with Frimpong and El Younisi as your outside midfielders, what the hell are you doing with Edouard being isolated? I mean, it was so incoherent. It was amazing. Like I would the odds of ending up with those two guys in the central midfield. What would that? I mean, that would have been 1 billion to 1 before the game at any point.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether under any scenario. So I think it goes back to Lennon's decision making, which is, first order thinking. Rogic has won big games. He's scored some big goals in big games, and I'll throw him on. That to me, I think that's probably the level of decision making that we're dealing with, and that is so ridiculous.
Yeah, I see. This is where the issue comes in with Sorrow getting booked so early, because I think if he's not booked in the second half, once Beaton gets sent off, there's a fairly easy decision to make there. You bring Duffy on for one of the strikers. You drop Duffy into a back four. You go 4-4-2. You keep Sorrow, Cal McGregor in centre midfield, Christie, and say Mikey Johnson if he comes on, and then Edouard up front by himself. It's a fairly easy fix. But the fact that Sorrow was booked, you can't get another person booked if he's going to be a defensive midfielder. So there's an issue there. You have to take him off, and if you're taking him off, then you have to bring someone else on. So there's a lot of moving plates here, but ultimately none of them really worked. And I do agree with you. So I don't think there was much real thought behind any of the substitutions in terms of the defensive.
Let me just cap off too. The icing on the cake. So we had no set piece takers. We were down to our fourth set piece taker, right? So our third best one, Christie, was taken off, and then we threw Duffy up, 1985 style, as a striker and lumping it into him with no one that can cross the ball and playing it long. I mean, again, just amazing. Those last 30 minutes were absolutely amazing, and not in a good way.
So, Alan, I know you actually have all of your numbers done from this game. You've rewatched them. So how bad are they?
I don't think they're bad. I think a couple of things I would point out to counterbalance, because people tend to fixate on one or two incidents. So we've talked about Laxalt. There's a lot to like about Laxalt, right? And but really his instructions should be, he's got, essentially 4 number 10s that he's playing with. Just give the ball to one of those guys. That's all you need to do. Don't try and cross it. Don't try and play, fancy diagonals. You don't have the ability to do it. The numbers are there. But what he does do is, he's a good defender in terms of his aggression, and he actually won 14 challenges. He won possession back 11 times. That is actually probably what you want if you're gonna focus your creativity in the diamond through those 4 midfielders, and then Edouard, I would say, is a proxy for a 10. Then you don't necessarily need your fullback to be creative, providing he can get the ball up and down, he can cover, which he can do. He's very athletic, and he's doing his job defensively, which he does exceptionally well. And there's a lot of criticism for Christie, again, mainly because of his attacking choices. Christie's he's the one midfielder that's not benefited from this switch to a diamond. His numbers are pretty much the same as they were before. is what I'm saying. But what he did do on the weekend was he was actually very responsible defensively. And I know his attacking output was poor, but of all the midfielders, he was packed the least number of times out. He was taken out of the game with passes only 7 times. All the other midfielders were into double figures because he was covering Frimpong constantly. And he had the best defensive action success rate of all the midfielders. It was around mid-50s towards 60%, sort of brown numbers in terms of the challenges that he was winning. So Christie did a lot of the dirty stuff. He did a lot of the covering. He did a lot of responsible work off the ball, I think, that people maybe didn't spot on the day, where people were really focusing on the shots he had at the end of the first half in terms of blazing over from 35 yards. And I completely get that. We know that's an issue. Him and Cham have got, expected goals per shot. It's like way below 0.1. It's terrible. but I think we do need to recognise the work that he did put in, and having Christie in a diamond as one of those 8s is a tremendously good idea because of that work rate, because of his defensive strength, because of his ability to cover. So I think we need to not as I say throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the aftermath of this game.
I see. Sorry, James, go ahead.
No, I was just I agree 100% with Alan on that. I thought Christie's play was excellent in that regard, and that's been the case in the other games where he's played in the diamond. There, I mean, he's if you look at his heat map, for example, he's been much more focused in his role. It's partly why I've been advocating because I think it highlights most of his benefits, most of his strengths and channels them productively. His work rate, his aggression and tackling, his engine. I mean, he's pretty fast when he gets, and he's persistent in that speed. And it gets him out of more. I mean, he had 2 horrible shots. That's an improvement, right? When he's been at right wing or at the pen.
It's usually more than 2.
Yeah, it's usually 6. Yeah, he usually takes 6 shots and 5 of them are bad. So that I think he is maybe not ideal for that role, but I think it's a much better role for him than how we've used him in the past.
So I've seen a lot of people absolutely slaughter Barkas in goal because obviously it fits the narrative. But we've spoken about goalkeepers before. What was the XG for the goal for Barkas saving that?
Well, there isn't one because it wasn't a shot.
Okay,
yeah.
It's as simple as that. It's not a shot. It's 0. The ball, Rebo's tried to flick it on, and it hits McGregor in the top of the arm. Actually, incredibly, and I don't know who was whispering in his ear, but Chris Boyd actually called it spot on. What happened was Edouard was guarding the front post, and as the ball came over, Edouard, perhaps anticipating that he could get the ball, moved away from the front post area, and this caused Barkas some consternation. So because he could see the ball coming into the front post area, Barkas took a step to guard his front post area, because if that ball had gone in at the front post, there was nobody there. And then, of course, the ball looped off McGregor and went to the back post, and it looked like Barkas was too far over. Barkas was trying to really cover for Edouard's unexpected movement. But to me, again, that's systemic of people not knowing their jobs at the corner, or maybe Edouard made a mistake. Maybe he did know his job, but it just hints at a lack of organization around that whole setup for that set piece. I'm going to say this, and for the people listening, I'm absolutely fucking sick of this vendetta against Barkas. I really am. The guy's literally done nothing wrong. We showed quite clearly in an earlier show that he's pretty much conceded the goals you'd expect him to do. Now his save percentage is incredibly low because he's had so little protection. But if we speak about the diamond, for example, under the previous setup with Brown in midfield and the 4-2-3-1, we were giving up 1.3 xG a game. A goalkeeper is going to concede goals, right? If you do that. Under the diamond, we're actually conceding 0.77 xG per game. That's a massive improvement. And that's against Lille, and that's against the Rangers, as well as the lower teams in the SPL. So it's a balance of opposition. So to blame it on Barkas, and especially when his confidence is, he's constantly got different people in front of him. He's in the team, he's out the team. Someone else is in, then they're out. Someone plays in the cup final, third choice, and then he's back in again. I mean, that's not an environment to breed confidence for someone, in a new country and in a new team, etc. So I think we need to really lay off him. I said before, give him. I would have given him 10 games and say, next 10 games are yours. I don't care what you do in those 10 games. We're going to give you at least that. Build the confidence, build the relationships, build the communication. Because the numbers are decent. The numbers aren't worrying to me around Barkas.
This comes back to on what planet. I mean, I think people have an unreasonable expectation of where Celtic's at right now. Yeah. We're not getting a Forster again. That he's kind of this is why I was so adamant about criticizing some of the decisions that were made last season, because we really did have a legit chance to go deep in the Europa League last year because of Forster's presence, which, it's kind of the Rodgers of goalies, right? We're not going to get a Rodgers probably again as manager. That was kind of a unique situation. The likelihood that we're going to get someone of Forster's skill level, particularly within the context of the style that Lennon plays, right? So it's always about fit. It's just not that high. So I don't know, it's like you had a one-night stand with a supermodel and then you expect that you're going to get married to one. It's not going to happen. That was probably an aberration. And I should say me, not you guys, because you guys probably had that happen all the time. So
less so during lockdown, but
so yeah, the only thing I would add on the corner is, and it speaks to setup again. The other person that was horrible on that, which I haven't heard too many people talk about, and it goes back to second balls and luck. So that happened to deflect into the goal, but Morelos was standing there unmarked about 3 yards off the goal line because Laxalt completely ball watched and left him go. So that's another example of second ball. I mean, that's our direct, the XG that we've conceded and the goals we've conceded directly off set pieces has not been all that out of line. It's been second balls. It's been, kind of the chaos that ensues after the initial action. That's been a real problem. And that was just the perfect example. So I think from start to finish, that corner kick was emblematic of, the problems between Edouard's decision, Laxalt leaving Morelos wide open, and then I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people blaming Barkas. It's he was the least of the problems on that goal.
I would pay good money to find someone who would save that, because I don't think anybody really expected it to happen. I certainly don't want this question to end up in a discussion around whether or not zonal marking is a bonus, or if it's a good thing or not a bad thing. But do you guys know what the difference in the XG for zonal marking versus man-to-man marking when it comes to corner kicks?
I think that's.
Is there many different?
I think it's a red herring. It's like people that insist you have to play two strikers up front. Oh, man-to-man mark. It's a very kind of, there's a certain set way of thinking that if you man to mark, then you can blame somebody when it goes wrong. It's like, that's such a weird logic to me. Okay, I think if you, again, based on similar principle to James of doing some research on this, doing some reading, listening to people who know about this sort of thing, what I took away from that is, ultimately, it comes down to the individuals that you have, okay. But really, if you wanted to establish a basic principle, you need to protect your front post area for corners. Absolutely, you probably want your taller players marking their taller players, and then you want everyone else pretty much arranged only. So it's a combination of mark the most effective opposition headers of the ball directly, mark the dangerous spaces where you don't want the ball to be landing, and that combination is usually actually the best model. But overarching all of that, irrespective of which system you go for, you have to be organized and people have to know their jobs, and that is the most important thing. And it doesn't matter whether it's zonal or man-to-man. If you don't know what your job is, or you're not clear on instructions, you don't have a clear method and approach that everyone believes in and has got confidence in, then you're gonna get chaos.
Yeah, and it's something as simple as, why was Edouard not marking a rebo instead of frimpong? I mean, I get he's not a defender, but you go back to I'm not saying that that's the right decision to make. I'm saying that if you look at physical profile, Is it a shock? I mean, it's like a lot of the season, and really the last couple of seasons, we've set up with Scott Brown marking strikers or people faster, more athletic, and that can jump higher than him on corners. And
yeah, but he's physically. He's very good physically. What I mean by that is physical intelligence of how to position his body to mess people up is very good. That's probably why.
I get that, but again,
you don't have to be taller to win the header. Just to disrupt. You just need to disrupt.
No, I get that, but again, this is where I think there's some benefit to cross sport analogies. So set pieces and corners are a lot like basketball. I mean, it really is. You think about, because all of these principles are similar in basketball. Do you play zone? Do you play, there's hybrid systems in basketball. I can tell you do not want someone of Scott Brown's profile marking anyone who's quick. I don't care how physical he is. I mean, going for a corner is not unlike going for a rebound, right? So, it doesn't make sense athletically to have certain people marking other people. And again, it could have been partly disorganization, but the idea that frimpong would have a hard time marking a rebo on a corner is obvious. It's self-evident, right? I can tell you that from basketball, right? Having a 5'8" point guard trying to out rebound a 6'6", Rebo's not 6'6", but the analogy, a 6'6" small forward, you're setting yourself up for failure. Mm-hmm. And so, I see some of these just conceptual things that all the time that drive me nuts. And this is just the latest example of that. So when you put those all together, you just run down the list of why that was a bad corner kick in defending. Back to Barkas is like 10, and his quote unquote mistake was, as you said, was derivative of Edouard's action, and he doesn't have Inspector Gadget arms that he could just make them go out 15 feet to reach that ball.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm actually quite old school in my thoughts when it comes to corner kicks, but in terms, I think if you have another man on the post at the back post, that goal doesn't happen. You have to litigate for these situations happening, and I do think there is a potential to play zonal marking while also having two men on the post. I don't see why it has to be one or the other, but ultimately, and again, is a point that I want to reiterate when it comes to Barkas as well. This is coming down to coaching and the lack of coaching. And I think that we should be judging these players when we see them properly coached, because at the minute that doesn't seem to be happening. And all you have to do is look at the difference between Celtic under Ronnie Deila and look at Celtic under Brendan Rodgers, or even just look at this team compared to the team that played under Brendan Rodgers. That Brendan Rodgers team was well coached. They knew what to do. They knew what their role was, and this team doesn't. That's what this really all comes down to. Before we get, or rather, on too long and go on for an hour and a half talking about what and where we went wrong and what happens now, is there anything you guys want to bring up as a specific talking point, or something you want to touch on going forward, what you want to see based on this game?
So for me, it would not to disband the diamond shape. My practical use of the diamond, admittedly, is not in elite sport. It's more been in kids football, where I've used it in a number of scenarios to solve a number of problems, all of which I think are pertinent to where Celtic were prior to switching. In one example, a team with no wingers. I think Celtic are very limited in that regard at the moment. Another scenario is where we had very creative players that were being wasted. They weren't getting on the ball enough, and putting them into a diamond allowed better connectivity, better spacing, and they got on the ball more. And then a third scenario, and these are all resonate, I think, with Celtic, was where a team was actually struggling. A team had been promoted into a new league, and suddenly the players were playing at a lot higher level than what some of them were used to. And we actually used the diamond to get the best players through the spine of the team, and it just strengthened the whole team and just gave the team confidence. I think all of those are, I think, as I've said before, in terms of just look at the expected goals conceded, we've stopped the bleeding, I think, defensively by shifting to this formation. That's we're giving up 6 shots a game, because previously it was over 8. The opposition are getting just over 8 touches in the box a game, and previously it was 12. The opposition are getting 2 passes into the danger zone, when previously it was 4. So I think we've stopped the bleeding. So I would say we continue with that formation. And also we've completely revolutionised, I would say, McGregor by playing in this system. You've completely freed him up to be the player that he's supposed to be. His expected assists is up. The number of key passes is up. His overall scoring contribution is up. And the number of challenges is actually that he's making is up, believe it or not. So he's just far more involved in the game, far more influential. And then obviously, Sorrow, Brown is probably a longer conversation in terms of that comparison. The comparison isn't as stark as maybe James might think, in terms of actually Sorrow's percentage numbers are lower than Brown's, but his volume of activity, the number of possessions that he wins back, he doesn't get bypassed as many times in midfield, and he makes more forward passes, and he carries the ball forward more. You just get more from him, and you just see the way he passes. Just one thing on Sorrow that I'll just touch on. All season, full season, right? Brown has passed to a striker that's taken someone out of the game and passed the ball forward to a striker 14 times all season. Sorrow did that 9 times in one game, in one of the matches, right? So he and because of the shape of the team, the diamond allows you to get not just more creative players on the pitch, but they're physically located close to each other. So you get those triangles, you get the movement. Yeah, and you've got, as I said, you've got 4 players there: Edouard, Christie, McGregor, Turnbull, who are really have got number 10 sensibilities. They know how to find space. They know how to move. Turnbull appears on the right, he appears on the left, what have you. My other takeaway is, because Turnbull's numbers are quite impressive in many respects. He's got the highest expected goals of any of the midfielders, number of key passes, expected assists, expected secondary assists. What was he doing in training? What was Sorrow doing in training? Those players have transformed this side, helped by the shape. And you have to give Lennon credit for that. He has made this change, and he stuck to it. We all thought Brown might be in for the Derby game, and he wasn't. I think he made a mistake, and his sentimental thinking in the cup final nearly cost Celtic that cup, actually. If he'd stuck to that diamond, I'm sure we'd have blown hearts away. The movement and the speed at which Celtic moved the ball forward and interchange against that very pedestrian, one-paced Hearts team would have been devastating, I think. But anyway, so my main takeaway going forward is we have to persist with it.
Yeah, I think what's such a gut punch about the weekend is, I think had we won that game, I think it was game on for the title, because I am optimistic like Alan. I think that, I don't think that the diamond is some magic solution generally. It's not a silver bullet for the game of football.
No, it is.
But I do think that, as Alan said, I've actually been advocating it since when we went 3-5-2 last season in January. I thought the diamond was the way to go, and because of the alignment relative to our personnel. And so I think there's a decent chance that we do go on a run here. And a lot of the same factors that I've been hammering on as to why Rangers were going to be a very difficult title challenge this season, i.e. one of them is that the rest of the league is terrible. I mean, how many times do we have to watch Hibs play terrible against a bad team?
Because they've all cut their cloth because of the current financial situation.
Exactly.
All except one team have done this.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't blame those teams, but it's just the reality that the gap in quality is wider than usual. We're now playing our best players, or for the most part, our best players, a lot closer to sensible roles that optimize their talents. So had we won on the weekend, I think it would have been game on. I think now we're into a really tough spot where they're clearly going to retain Lennon. So what do we do now, right? So this is, again, part of my criticism going back to the end of the window in October when keeping all of these players, is that we've now got a gun to our head. We've got these 4 huge assets that are now 18 months away from their contract being done. And Edouard just changed his agent to somebody who's more likely to look to push a move. And the sensible business decision at this point, in my opinion, is for Celtic to clean house, to sell every valuable player asset that isn't bolted down, because the probabilities now, it's not zero, but the likelihood of us winning 19 games straight and Rangers dropping what they need to drop, which is 5 points, it's just not a high likelihood. And even with the diamond, even with playing the players in the roles they are, any adversity, this is to me the big takeaway from the weekend. As much as I took a lot of, it's funny, I've been one of the probably the most critical people of Lennon this season, and I turn around and say, hey, he gets credit for making the switches, and then I get hammered for that's social media. Then I get hammered for being too nice to Lennon. So he does get credit, I think, should get credit for going to the diamond. But what the weekend proved is, I don't know how much of that was well thought out and how much of it was just, hey, we're going to try something again, try something new, and that it was going to work. And now it's like, okay, if the difficult circumstances in a close game at Livingston, right? If we're 70 minutes in against Livingston and we've been dominating play, the yellow card certainly played a factor, but the decision to bring Brown on in that circumstance to replace Soro to drive, quote unquote, drive the team on to win against Livingston, that's the kind of decision making that we run the risk of for the rest of the season. And we don't have a margin now where we can make bad decisions in any game that increases our chances of dropping points.
And James, there are risks, as you said, in terms of events that can happen with a diamond. That we've got to accept the risk, right? And actually, the key example of that was the Dundee United game. Okay, Dundee United game just after half time. Again, because the defense was a little bit stretched, we're playing forward. The fullbacks are out of position. A long ball, two passes, get the ball to McNulty. McNulty runs through, and Julian smacks his knee off the post. And I think you could argue our season ended there.
Well, and that's
because he's actually our best, and that is one of the systemic weaknesses of that system. Is that that pass actually resulted in Bitton being sent off as well, and that could happen in any game going forward, away to Livingston or wherever.
Yeah, agreed, and that's so you're right. That was the other thing I was going to bring up with Julian, pretty much done for the season now. So what does the board do? Do they sell some of these players? Because if we go into the summer with 3 or 4 of these players within a year, if I'm one of those players, I mean, the negotiating leverage that Celtic have at that point goes way down. And then not only with the player, but also the potential buying club. And then we're absorbing the risk of where the transfer market is going to be. And this is I think, one of the things that I haven't seen too many people talk about relative to this past transfer window is, I think, people get conditioned, and we've been in an environment for all of Peter Lawwell's career where player values only go up, right? An inflationary transfer market. And in the last year, the market has softened, right? This is a market, and prices has softened. So if you go into the market saying, I want 40 million, whatever he did, who knows, but there was some reporting, 40 million for Edouard, 45 for Edouard, into a softening market, guess what happened? You end up not selling people. And that's a deflationary spiral, they call it, right? Where you keep hoping that you're going to get a price because you've anchored your expectations in a market that doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So I see all of these risks that are, kind of formulating here. And I think what the board's assuming is that we're just going to be able to get 60 million for these guys in the summer. I'm worried about this, that we're just going to be able to get 60 million for these guys in the summer. That's going to cover all of the gap that we have financially for this season that we've bulked up to spend. And we've, basically drained all of our cash reserves now. And they might even eat into the $13 million line of credit before the end of the season if they don't sell anyone in January. So again, you're talking about risk. And with this nonsense that's gone on with Dubai, that's the way the season has happened. Season tickets don't come in the way they hope. Retaining Lennon for the rest of the year. Things maybe not going great for the rest of the season, potentially. this is a mix here where we get into more decision making that creates risk.
Put your money on the centre back pairing for the first European qualifier next season being Bitton and Welsh. Put your money on it.
It's crazy. So even if they do bring in a new manager in May or early June or whatever it is, you're exactly right, Alan. I mean, what's the turnover going to be? I mean, we'll get to this in future shows, but the amount of overhaul that has to take place here, and to think it's going to all happen in 6 weeks in the middle of the Euro tournament, it's amazing. So, but I think they're flying by the seat of their pants. I think they were trying to get to the end of 10 in a row, and they were going to do a lot of restructuring and overhauling things at that point. And this has just blown all of their plans up, and they panicked. They're panicking as much as Lennon has panicked.
Mm-hmm. To be fair, panicking would have been getting rid of Lennon. Actually, you've got to admit, if they genuinely believe the least disruptive option, and there was no better option available, was to keep Lennon. I'm not saying I agree with that, but you have to admit that's a ballsy call.
See, I actually disagree. But most people, when they panic, revert to type. Mm. So when people go under high stress, they revert.
No, but most boards would sack the manager.
But that's not the Celtic board.
No, that's the easy thing to do, right?
I get that, but that's not the Celtic board. The DNA of the Celtic board is triple down. We've seen what Dermot Desmond when it's double down, triple down, and it's going back to what your culture is, what your type is, and confirmation bias. So they panicked by keeping Lennon. Which is that's how we from the outside world, when people go into cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, people outside go, "What the hell are you doing? How can you not see this?" Mm-hmm. Right? Well, it's because they're triggered. Like they literally think that this is the best way to go because the panic has triggered this path, and they're reverting to what they know. They think they know. So so that's why we get into what are the probabilities that we're going to win the league here, and whether or not, assuming that financial risk of keeping those players or a large number of those players for the rest of the season. So we'll have a much better sense by the end of this month, I think, in what they decide to do. I think the prudent thing to do at this point is to clean house.
Yeah.
That's not a good,
But I agree with you. I think they'll do nothing.
We didn't want to get here, but again, they haven't made prudent decisions the whole season for the most part.
I think we will do nothing, and by the looks of what's leaking out in the sun, that's exactly what is going to happen over the next couple of months. But I think we should return to that. I think we'll look at the recruitment and maybe the potential managers and what is going to happen after this season, because I think that's worrying financially and also on the football pitch as well. So we'll return to that next week, but we are out of time this week. I think this is our longest podcast ever, but I think it deserved it after being 19 points behind and losing to Rangers on the 3rd of January. So yeah, we'll return to all that, but we also do have some exciting news coming up about the Huddle Breakdown. That's going to be coming out on social media over the next couple of days. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to listen back to all our podcasts, as always, they are available on Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, and on the OTB Podcast Network as well. So you can check them out there or on the YouTube channel as well. Be sure to subscribe and to leave a review as well. Bad or good, but return to us anyway. That's all we have time for. James and Alan, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we'll chat to you later.